presentation today will be by Bob Dahm, Robert Dahm from State Fire Marshal's Division. He's going to provide us with some information on the emergency response teams for hazardous materials. He currently coordinates that through the State Fire Marshal's Division of Public Safety. And I'll let him go into his titles and all that because I think change those weekly now. His title. He gets a raise every time he changes his title, so tries to get some changes. So the new Robert?
I'm the first of your freebies.
He was a local one.
Actually, as I came down the steps, there was another table out in the hall, and those guys were giving away free T-shirts over there, so I almost wandered into that. Sounded like a good deal. Yeah, why don't you just let me just pass some things out around to you and. Relates to fire protection engineering, but Bob tells me you are a group of diverse people with diverse interests, so perhaps we'll take advantage of that. As Bob said, I'm with the State Fire Marshal Division and with Mr. Brace for about 4 years. 4 years as of September 9th, I believe, this month. And my position with Tom's office has been to coordinate a new program in the Department of Public Safety that has been established to provide a hazardous materials response capability throughout the state of Minnesota. Prior to this program, there was not such a capability existing. Predominantly where when you had a hazardous materials incident of any magnitude, if that incident occurred outside the metro area, you were hard-pressed to find trained and equipped personnel who could deal with the public safety issues that such an incident presented. Typically in rural Minnesota, our fire services don't have the personnel, the training budget, the equipment budget, nor the time in terms of training and maintenance of skills and maintenance equipment to put a system together for rural Minnesota that allows them to respond to significant spills of hazardous materials. So this program is an effort to compensate for that, not only in greater Minnesota, but in the rural area, in the metropolitan area as well. Although the majority of single department teams are located in the metro area, there still are parts of the metro area that are not served by such a capability. So our purpose was to put a program together within the Department of Public Safety that would provide that service. Just to give you a quick indication of what we're looking at when we talk about hazmat. In this country, we're seeing about 500,000 shipments of hazardous materials each day occurring throughout the country. Now that can be anything from a MC306, the typical gasoline tanker that you see going down the highway, to radioactive materials, to 5 pounds of retail packaged pesticides and this type of thing that you would buy in the Kmart's and Walmart's of Minnesota. But generally, we're seeing about 500,000 shipments that occur in this country every day. In Minnesota, we have existing better than 3,000 facilities that are classified under a federal law known as the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act of 1986 as EHS, or Extremely Hazardous Substance Facilities. These are facilities that have on site one or more of approximately 360 different chemicals that are classified by the EPA as extremely hazardous because of either their toxicity or their flammability or their explosiveness or some characteristic of that particular substance they have identified and cause it to be identified as an extremely hazardous substance. In addition, we're looking at roughly 7,300 of what we call Tier 2 facilities in Minnesota. And that is a facility that has on site 10,000 pounds or more of a hazardous material. That gives you just kind of an idea, just in Minnesota, what we're looking at in terms of hazmat. Well, to deal with that, there was some research that was done back in the late 80s and repeated early in the 90s that showed that just approximately 18% of fire services in Minnesota were trained to what is called the operations level. That means that they could respond to a hazardous materials incident and say, yep, that's hazmat. They might be able to dike it or contain the spill in some way, but they were not trained and capable of going and actually mitigating the incident, stopping the release from occurring. And as I speak to it, more often than not, sticking their finger in the dike, so to speak, to actually control what is happening out there. Less than 4% of the fire services in Minnesota at that time had personnel that were trained to the technician level. And those are the people that could actually go in and mitigate the spill and do that kind of work. So with those kind of figures in your mind, this is why the program really got started and why the effort was made to put a statewide system in place. Our personnel, I know that you folks deal with training quite a bit for yourselves and for people that work with you. There are some very definite standards that we must train our people to in order to perform the functions of hazardous materials teams. And our old friend OSHA comes into play on that very heavily with 29 CFR 1910-120, which specifies minimum training standards for people that are going to respond to hazardous materials incidents. And our administrative rules that establish this program obviously need to require that our personnel be trained to those standards. But we've gone beyond that in Minnesota and actually also required that they be in substantial compliance with NFPA standards, NFPA 472, which is the national standard for fire department response, fire personnel response to hazardous materials incidents. And also in one particular case, we ask that a medical support officer that comes in with each team achieve a little higher standard of training yet with NFPA 473, which is one that just deals specifically with medical personnel responding to those kinds of incidents. We have two types of teams in Minnesota, and it might be worthwhile for you to understand what those are. The first type of team that we have, we call an emergency response team. And this is a team that is made up of a minimum of 30 persons in order to even function as a team. And we require that 9 of those individuals make a response anytime the team is requested. We need to have 9 of them go out the door with the truck and the equipment. We require of that 9 that 4 of them be trained to OSHA's highest level of training, which OSHA classifies as a specialist level, and then 4 of those to be trained at the technician level, which is just a step slightly lower than that, and then our medical support officer being trained at the operations level with additional 473 training. We also have what are called chemical assessment teams. Chemical assessment teams are just what their name implies. Their function is to respond to an incident and to make an assessment of the hazard that's presented by that release, determine in conjunction with the local authorities that are on the scene what can be done to the local level of training and equipment to mitigate that incident. So they're not really stick your finger in the dike folks, but they are the folks that go out and say, this is what's happened. This is what the toxicology of that product is. This is what the hazards that are presented by that release to public safety, to the environment. And this is what we need to do in terms of protecting life and property and the environment. And with your level of training, local fire chief, this is what you can perform to try to deal with that. The chemical assessment team needs a minimum of 9 members in order to be a team. And we require that 3 of those people go out the door on a response. One of those at the specialist level and 2 of them at the technician level. One of the things that we've been very pleased with as the training that has gone on with these teams over the last few years is that the majority of the teams that are going to be part of our program, and you have a list of those. I think the green sheet lists the chemical assessment teams, and you can see where around the state those are. The Arrowhead Hazmat team is predominantly out of the Grand Rapids area. It's a combination of the Grand Rapids Fire Department, the Cohasset, Coleraine, and some of the smaller departments in that area. Duluth Fire, Hopkins Fire, Mankato, Moorhead. The North Metro Hazmat team is a combination team consisting of personnel from Coon Rapids, Fridley, and the Spring Lake Park Lane Mounds View Fire Department. And then over on the back you have Rochester Fire, St. Cloud Fire, St. Paul Fire, and one private corporation. Minnesota is a bit unique in terms of the other states, or in relation to other states that have similar kinds of programs, in that the vast majority, if not all of them, require that the state can only contract with a public entity to provide this service. Where in Minnesota, our law permits us to contract not only with public but with private corporations as well. So the last one on the list, not for any reason other than it comes alphabetically, is West Central Environmental Consultants, which is located in Morris, Minnesota, and they're a private cleanup contractor. And so they're taking on a different role, as typically their response would be from an environmental perspective, go on and clean up the material after it's been spilled. They're taking on a little bit different role in moving into the public safety arena also, and coming in where normally they would not be present until some time later. So that is the chemical assessment teams. There are 10 of them around Minnesota. 4 of those 10 also serve as emergency response teams, and those are listed on this kind of buff-colored sheet here: Duluth, Moorhead, Rochester, and St. Paul. As you can see, there is a real difference between a number of chemical assessment teams and emergency response teams. The idea behind the two types of teams was a belief that, number one, we wanted more of the smaller teams scattered around the state, because we felt that they could make, with 3 people, could make it a more immediate response, get trained, qualified personnel and equipment to the scene rapidly, and begin the process of assessing the hazard and preparing the scene for the larger team to come in and actually do the mitigation. We think that the majority of the responses that we're going to see in Minnesota, based on the incidents that have occurred, are going to be able to be handled by these 3-person chemical assessment teams. So that when a chemical assessment team goes out, that is their function, to prepare, in addition to doing the assessment work on the incident, preparing the local authority, but also to prepare the scene for the larger team to come in should that larger team be needed. So that when a full team is dispatched, a total of 12 personnel are going to respond to that incident wherever it might be in Minnesota, if there is actually some mitigation that needs to be done.
Bob, you might mention that with the possibility of adding additional teams depending on the size and scale.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that we have done in this program is tried to, how do I want to say this? We're trying to build a system, and you guys build systems. And you know that when you build a system, you don't have really a system until all the parts fit together. Well, one of the things that we did in Minnesota, unlike some of our other states, was we made the determination early on that what we really wanted in Minnesota was a true system. So that, as Tom mentioned, if we need more than one team in a scene, we can bring Duluth together, we can bring St. Paul together, we can bring Moorhead together, and we can meet up in Deep River Falls or wherever it might be if there's a major hazardous material spill. And in order to do that, people have got to be singing off the same song sheet. So early on, we decided that rather than like some of our neighboring states, we weren't just going to write out a check and give it to you and Duluth Fire Department, and you go out and buy whatever equipment you need in order to do the job. We made the determination that the state was going to purchase a good deal of the equipment, including the vehicles, and loan that equipment to the contractor for the term of their contract. And in doing so, you now have a 4-gas monitor that's the same as yours, Dave. Okay? Not that you bought one from MSA, Mine Safety Appliance, and you bought one from Draeger. Maybe your MSA just kind of goes down the toilet, so to speak, when least needed to do, and now you have to use Daryl's Draeger. But you don't know how to use that one because you're used to operating an MSA. So this is the kind of thing we did with our program, to try to build that consistency. Consistency in instrumentation, communications equipment, chemical protective clothing, and some of the basic stuff. At the same time, Dale, it doesn't make any difference when you've got an adjustable wrench from Montgomery Ward's and you got one from Sears and Roebuck. An adjustable wrench is an adjustable wrench. They all work pretty much the same. So that was one of the things that we tried to build into this program. I think we've been fairly successful in doing that. Where we're at with this whole system right now is that it has taken certainly much longer than I think anybody thought. Clearly, much longer than I thought to put this program together. But where we're at this stage is that we are nearing completion of the contracting process. I believe we have all but 4 teams right now under contract, and we do actually have a couple of them online and able to respond, but we have 4 teams that are still working through the contracting process. Either their contracts are moving through the final stages of the state approval system, or they're moving through the stages of approval at the local level, somewhere along in that line. It's our hope that by the 1st of November, all of the chemical assessment teams at least will be in place, and that by the 1st of the year, all the emergency response teams will be in place. System fully operational by January 1 of '97. So that's our hope at this stage. It's taken us a tad better than 4 years to get to that point, but I think in the long run it's going to prove well to be in our benefit to having gone that road. I told the State Fire Chiefs Association 4 years ago when I started out that one of the few promises that I made them was that when we're all done, we want people coming to Minnesota to see how we do it here. Oregon was one of the early states to get into this kind of response system, and they were really the Cadillacs. That's what everybody looked to Oregon as to how to build one of those things. And so me and my pride, I guess, I want them to come to Minnesota. And a little smile on my face because I got a call a week and a half ago from Casper, Wyoming, who is about the same position that we were 4 years ago, sort of treading water and hoping to make it upstream just a little bit. Got a call from Casper, Wyoming, and sent them out a big package of materials. And they've heard about Minnesota. They've heard about what they've done. And so I may be going out to Wyoming at some point in the future to tell them what we've done in Minnesota and how we've gone about doing it. Now when I see Bruno Wilson from Oregon, I think, well, gotcha, Bruno. We stole one from you. Actually, it was one of your neighbors. That really is a very quick overview of the program, and one of the other sheets, a couple of the other sheets that you have there, the blue one is just some kind of general information about the state program. The other one talks about the Hazardous Materials Incident Response Act that actually established the program. And you can take a look at those things as you please, or not, to give you a little bit more background on what I'll spend time doing this evening. One of the issues there is, as you folks work obviously very closely with the private sector, this program has been really, the term is overused, but I think it does apply. It's really been a partnership between government and industry. The industry was very excited, very interested in having this type of program put together because they understood the benefits to themselves. If they can get a response to a spill that they might have on a fixed facility or out on a highway someplace that is going to help them control the effects of that spill. Obviously, it's going to save them some money in terms of cleanup costs, environmental damage, and so on. So they were very enthusiastic and have been very supportive of the program as it went through the stage of getting the law passed, development of the administrative rules, and so forth. The program is really funded by industry, which speaks of their commitment to it. The money that is used to buy all of this equipment and to contract with these departments to provide this service comes from fees paid by industry. And those facilities that I talked to you about, those 3,000 302 facilities, those EHS facilities, each of those facilities pays a fee annually. I believe it's only $75, but it is a fee that goes into the state to help us fund these contracts to purchase all of this equipment. There's another category of facilities called a 313 facility. They pay fees, and because they're a different type of hazardous materials generator, they pay a different type of fee, and it's a little higher, ranging from $200 to $800. The transportation industry pays fees, and all of that comes in, and that's where the funds come from to pay for all of the equipment, to pay for the program. Response costs are another issue. We're not going to call you Duluth Fire anymore, Gerald. We're going to call you Acme Chemical, and Acme Chemical has a spill, and the Duluth Fire Department comes and deals with your incident. Now we have the cost of their response, and so the other piece of it that industry picks up and is required to do so by law, the Commissioner of Public Safety is required to go to Acme Chemical and say, these are the costs that we incurred in responding to your spill, and here's the bill. We have paid the teams, and now the spill is yours. And you have paid to have this insurance policy in place, let's say. I liken it to a retainer paid to an attorney. You have paid to have this system there, but now you had to use it because you really had something happen. So those costs are yours. So that's how that is recovered as well. In effect, there's really very little tax dollar that goes into it. The argument can be made that these are taxes, and I understand all of that, but there's very few general fund tax items. Just to give you an idea, the chemical assessment team, the cost of equipping one chemical assessment team is approximately $175,000 per team. The cost of equipping one emergency response team is about $350,000. That's just the equipment. So you can see, Elysian Fire Department, Southern Minnesota, with a budget of $25,000 a year on a good day, certainly isn't capable of providing for that level of service in their people. I want to just spend a few minutes with you on some of the equipment that the teams use, but before I do that, just generally, any questions or thoughts that you folks have on the program?
How big is your budget then?
The annual contracting costs at this point are about $720,000 a year.
This is what you pay each individual fire department to have to train people like that?
That's correct. Each emergency response team receives from the state annually $120,000 a year. Each chemical assessment team receives $40,000 a year. So 10 of those, we're looking at $720,000 a year. And that money goes to supplement the costs that they incur. St. Paul Fire Department, for example, has had a hazardous materials team since Pluto was a pup. But they have responded to their incidents within their jurisdiction, and now recently some of the neighboring inner-ring suburbs they've contracted. But what we're asking St. Paul now to do, see by some of the response boundaries, St. Paul could end up going as far as western Grenville County. Okay? So what we have said to St. Paul is, and the rest of the teams as well, here's $120,000 a year to help you provide some additional trainings, medical costs, capital equipment, supplies, and some things that will allow you to respond outside of your normal jurisdiction.
What happened last year with those major train spills?
The one over in Wisconsin?
Wasn't there one in Minnesota here too somewhere?
Yeah, there was one up in Cushing earlier this year.
Yeah, so did your teams respond to that?
The teams were not in place at that time. And frankly, what we got was, we've been real lucky in Minnesota. We have not had a Waiwega, Wisconsin type incident since, I think probably the closest thing to that was Annandale, around 90, 91, something like that. And so we've been really fortunate in Minnesota not to have significant incidents. We've had a number of train derailments. Cushing is one of them. Perham was another. The fact of the matter is that there was not significant releases going on there, that the railroad was able to come in over a period of time, control those releases. The response was not as immediate as it would have been if we had teams in place, but they were capable of doing that. The other thing that has happened, Ed, is that there are 3 people within the Department of Public Safety, myself and 2 counterparts in the Division of Emergency Management, who are functioning right now as one-person chemical assessment teams. And we are on call, one of us is on call from 8 o'clock Monday morning till 8 o'clock the following Monday morning, and we rotate that every 3rd week. And in the case of the Cushing derailment, happened to be the week that I was not on call, but the person who was on call was able to get up there with much of the same equipment that the chemical assessment teams carry, and which I carry in my truck, the stuff that you see on the table, and was able to provide some support to the local as well.
Well, I guess that talking about the who's in control of the situation with the, let's say, the TWA crash orders, this department, that department. In Minnesota, then, with these chemical response teams in place, who is the lead agency, if you want to call it that?
Very good question. Very good question. From the public safety perspective, it is the local incident commander who is in charge, overall charge of the incident. When one of our teams shows up on the scene, we do not take overall command of that incident. In fact, our administrative rules prohibit us from doing that. So it stays with that local fire chief or police chief, county sheriff, whoever their local emergency plan specifies as being that commander. We work in support of those people.
The railroad would then be subject to their controls.
We work in Minnesota under what is called the Minnesota Incident Management System. And if some of you ever heard of the ICS or Incident Command System, it's very similar to that. And the way we work in Minnesota is, rather than, Ed, you're head honcho, you are the god of this incident, so to speak. We would have Gerald from Acton Chemical, and you, Dale, County Sheriff, and Dean from the railroad, or what have you, and we'd all be together, and we would be making decisions together. In addition to PCA, maybe DOT, whatever other state agencies might have a role in that incident. We come together. We all sit around the table and we say, this is what needs to be done, and come to those decisions as a group rather than having the incident czar, so to speak. Yes, Ed, as public safety, as fire chief, ultimately what you say goes for the public safety side of the incident. We try to do this in concert. One of the unique things about the Waiwega derailment, for example, was that actually the Wisconsin Central Railroad was given charge of response operations at the scene. Very unique. In my experience, unheard of from a public safety perspective, but that's what they did. I rather doubt that you would see that in Minnesota.
Correct.
I strongly doubt that you would see that. But we would be around, at least around the table with them. I make no prejudgment of whether that was good or bad. The fact was that that's the way it was. Anything else? Yeah, Bernie?
Who makes a decision as to when a team is sent?
Good question. The team is by administrative rule, can only be requested by local authorities at the scene. Gerald, as CEO of Acme Chemical, cannot get on the phone and say, send me to the Duluth Emergency Response Team. We would say, Gerald, thank you for calling, but please call the Duluth Fire Department first. Your facility is in Duluth. Please dial 911 first. Or your facility is in Tokay. Please dial 911 first. And we can only take that request from the sheriff or the fire chief or what have you. The point of contact for requesting them is the state duty officer. There is a one call number in Minnesota whereby any incident that occurs, there's one number to dial to do the reporting that's required by state and federal law and to request assistance from state agencies and all that sort of thing. So that becomes the point of contact as well. Gordy in Minneapolis has a spill at Honeywell or what have you, and you, as I see on the scene, could make that request to the state duty office. Anything else? Okay, let me just show you a few other things. To quickly give you a feel, Bob thought you guys might be interested in toys. And this is just a spattering. I drive a suburban vehicle, and Bob, having been with the Fire Marshal's Division not just too long ago, may remember that it was, my truck has been nicknamed Kid. And that has nothing to do with any type of personality. It's because there's so doggone many boxes in it. Mr. Brace asked me the other day, I was parked down at the loading dock, and he said, he looked at the truck, he was coming down to get in his car, and I was getting in my truck, and he said, how much more can you get in there? There is room for me to sit, to just bear my response to him, jokingly, and I'm glad he took it that way, how much money do you have, Tom? But this stuff is not cheap, as you can see, as you can tell by the prices and the costs that I gave you. This particular instrument is one of two identical instruments that's been issued to the teams. It's called a Draeger multi-pack. We refer to it as a 4-gas monitor. It's an instrument that measures explosivity, the percent of O2 in the room, percent of oxygen, carbon monoxide presence in the room, and it has what is called a broadband toxic sensor, so that this instrument will detect the presence of about 15 different toxic substances, some of the more common ones. This device right here is about $2,500. To replace one of the sensors in this instrument is anywhere between $200 and $350. Different types of sensors, electrochemical, and we can get into a bunch of stuff that is far more technical than we want to tonight. But, this is one of the instruments that they carry. And one of the first things that chemical assessment team would do when it arrives on scene is to make a determination about the hazard in the atmosphere that is present. Is that if it's a flammable liquid, do I have in the atmosphere around that spill site a concentration of a flammable gas, a flammable vapor, sufficient to explode or to burn? That's a hazard, clearly. Okay? So this is the instrument that they would use, and one of the first things they would do would be to walk carefully towards that spill site to determine at what point they are at a flammable concentration of at least 10% of the lower explosive limit, the LEL. Okay? And when they reach 10% of the LEL, they back off. They say, this is our stop point. They'll commence then to walk around the table until they hit another point where it says 10% of the LEL, and they'll stop. They'll mark that spot. In other words, trying to identify and characterize the hazard area. Once that's been determined, we know then how to protect the public better. We can determine what mitigation strategies need to take place and so on and so forth. So, you folks will be pleased to know that you are breathing in this room proper concentration of oxygen, 20.9%. There is no carbon monoxide in the room, and at least not any one of the 15 toxic gases that this thing will detect. Should be in good shape now. So that is one device.
Don't take it to the kitchen.
Don't take it in the kitchen. Another device that the chemical assessment teams carry is what is called a colorimetric tube detector. I'm going to try to find your box of tubes that I have already gotten open and which has expired. Color detector tubes have been around for many, many years. The first one was actually developed back in the late 1800s to detect the presence of methane gas in coal mining operations. And what a color detector tube is, the principle of, there's all different makes and manufacturers from out there, Draeger, Sensodyne, Gas Tech, Mine Safety Appliance, but they all work on essentially the same principle. You have a sealed glass tube, vacuum created in this tube. And inside that tube you have inert material, glass beads, silica, whatever, what have you, that is impregnated or mixed with different types of chemical reagents. And what you do with a device like this is that you cut off both ends of the tube. These things are numbered for firefighters. Stick the thing in hole 1 and then stick the thing in hole 2. Right?
Big letters?
No, but they are raised, so you can run your finger across them. And tough too. What you end up doing is you once you get this thing opened up, you insert it in that pump and draw through it. I just spent $9.95 on a new tube cutter. You can see that. I'll get this on tape. The equipment doesn't work. Supposed to be a quick and easy operation, right? When in doubt, go to plan and do, which is you take this tube once you get both ends of it open. And there's a little arrow on it. See, it's firefighter proof. It tells you what direction to put the thing into the tube, and so that you insert the tube into the device like that, and you read the tube, and it tells you how many pumps on this meter it has to have, and in this case, it doesn't. 5. And so you squeeze this pump 5 times. And you allow the air to be drawn through the tube in a pre-measured stroke. Okay. You squeeze that 5 times. And after you get all of that done, you can remove the tube, and then you visualize the tube, and you see, has there been a color change? And as the color changes and slides up the tube, it tells you, in this case, this is a tube for detecting the presence of ammonia. The concentration in the room might range from 5, 10, 20, up to 70 parts per million. So this is a device where if you know what product you're going into, this allows you to do it. This kind of a junior chemistry set over here is called the Hazmat kit. It's really nice when we go out on a response And when we get on the scene, and Dale, as fire chief, you come up and say, here's all the shipping papers off that truck, and here's exactly what's in it, and how much of it, and we know what is there. Wonderful. We're in hog heaven when that kind of thing happens. But it is not uncommon for us to get called to a building. I'm thinking of one in particular that Minneapolis responded to a few weeks back. You get called to a facility, and what you find out is that you got a whole mess of abandoned barrels out behind this building. I believe it was over off of Lake, somewhere around in that area, Gordy. And what was in the barrels? The Lord only knows, and He hasn't spoke to me in a good long time. So you need, before you can deal with something like that, you need to know what the product is. Well, in order to find that out, if you don't have readily available information, you use a piece of equipment like that. It's called a Hazmat kit. It's a chemical classification system where we can take a sample of a product, this coffee, for instance, and we can determine exactly what that product is, or if not exactly, we can at least put it into a category of chemicals. We can tell you that it's a hydrocarbon, or that it's a chlorine substance, or something along that line. Okay? And this is just like really running a chemistry experiment. It's a very sequential way of going about doing this thing, starting out with the simplest of all tests. When I take the liquid out of the closed jar and put it in the Petri dish, does it evaporate? Okay? If it evaporates, chances are it's an alcohol product or a petroleum product. If it doesn't evaporate, there's another series of tests that you go through from that point. Is it acidic? Simply taking a piece of pH paper. Is it an oxidizer? Simply taking a piece of oxidizer. And so on down the line. And there is, the first time I worked with one of these things was about 3 years ago, and the guy put the chart down in front of me, and he says, this is what you're going to do. Here's the chart for determining what an unknown liquid might be. Okay? And I looked at that and I said, look folks, I want to get this done in 20 minutes. You know, I need to be able to find out what this stuff is. And he says, don't worry, you will. And for a fellow that avoided chemistry with a passion all through high school and dodged it like a bullet in college, this little thing scared the living bejesus out of me. But particularly when he handed me that chart, it looked pretty daunting. But even with my very limited chemistry knowledge, I was able to do this. And quite frankly, I have a lot of fun with it. Every once in a while, I'll find something in my garage that my wife had before she had me, and I'll take a little sample of it and haul this kid out. And see what kind of graft and corruption you got stored in this unmarked jar speak. So, but that is another piece of equipment that the chemical assessment teams would carry, again, to allow them to determine what the product is, and therefore then being able to determine what the hazard is. Radiation detection instrument. We're not going to do a whole lot in terms of radioactive materials, but we do have them passing through Minnesota. In the case of Minnesota, the vast majority of it is medical-related products, medical isotopes. We've had very few radioactive materials incidents. I can think of one about 5 years ago in Ramsey County where a fellow was hauling some medical isotopes. And, he got home, he got out of his truck, the pickup truck, went to the back of the truck, and realized that the pig, the lead case that he was carrying this medical isotope in was no longer in the back of his pickup truck. Okay? It had fallen out. And so there was a rather significant search of northeast part of Ramsey County going on, and found the radioactive source that contained it, no leak in the spill. We don't have a lot of radioactive materials incidents, but we do have them in Minnesota. This is, you may be familiar with the old yellow civil defense type, Geiger counter type of instrument. With all due respect to our friends from Civil Defense Days, accuracy in my judgment left a great deal to be desired. This is probably the Cadillac of radioactive detection instruments in the country, and I'll just pass this around to you. Our role in radioactive materials incidents is going to be to respond to it. Yes, it's radioactive. I'm going to go back here now. Okay? And we're going to call somebody in from the health department or the manufacturer of the product to actually deal with it and clean it up. So that's where we're really going to stop on radioactive materials. But we do need to be able to deal with some of it. This is the part of that device that I like really a lot, because what I can do with this is I can attach a little horse collar type of thing around the top of this, and I can put one end of this cord to that thing, and I can go back about 40 feet, and I can say, yes, it's radioactive, or no, it's not. That's the thing. Actually, we joke a little bit about radioactive materials, but the truth of the matter is that I would, given the choice, would rather respond to a radioactive materials incident than I would any other incident. It is the one substance that you can positively always identify its presence or its absence. You know that it is or is not radioactive. No question. I don't have to go sciencing anything out. All I got to do is carry that little instrument over, and if I get a reading, I know what it is. Just a couple other things quickly. This is kind of a unique thing to Minnesota. I mean, in terms of public safety hazardous materials response. One of the things that I have long maintained that we have been very lax in the fire service, particularly as there are publics, not necessarily fire service, public safety response to hazardous materials incidents, is that we very infrequently actually document what the product was that was involved. Okay? So we have a release, and Jim, you're a half a mile downwind from that, and 6 months later you come to Acme Chemical here, Daryl's company, and you say, boy, you spilled that stuff 6 months ago, and now look, I was blonde and 25 before that happened. Full head of hair. That's your fault, because you had that release, and this cloud of 2-dipolymethylethyl meatloaf came over my house. Okay? Well, we've done a terrible job of documenting in public safety response exactly what was released from Daryl's company. And so one of the things that we've decided that we're going to do is use a system like this. It's called the Kevlar bag sample collection system. And what we can actually do on a gaseous release is we can go out and we can take a sample of the atmosphere and we can trap it in a bag like this and seal it in there. And now I'm going to take this to a laboratory that has a mass spec device, gas chromatograph, and they'll be able to take a sample out of that bag, and they'll be able to tell me exactly what that, or reasonable proximity of what the product was. And so, Daryl, I could come to you 6 months later with the results of that release, and I could say, yeah, they did put 2-dipolymethylethyl meatloaf out of their plant, but the sample bag that we took in your backyard, it never got to you. Okay? Stopped at Dale's house. And actually, instead of getting older, he got younger, so we were out. But this is a system that is unique to Minnesota in terms of public safety hazmat response. It's something that we're trying here to the best of my understanding and experience with other teams around the country. Nobody else is using this. We feel that it is a critical piece of our response and our need to respond. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. Now, I'm not going to try to pass this thing around, but basically what happens is you pull this bag in here, you put a pump to it, you create a vacuum inside this box after you seal it up, and you suck atmosphere in. That's essentially how the process works. Well, that's kind of it, I think, on the hot little toys. For you folks that are being sprinkler folks, and my dad's a plumber, so I understand some of that. This is more of the plumber's kit kind of box, and this is just an example of some of the mitigation equipment that the teams carry. What you're seeing is the instrumentation here up to this point, how we detect the presence of the material, how we determine what that substance might be. After we've identified the product, we need to find a way to control the release. And this is one of the devices that we use. A company called Edwards and Cromwell makes this kit and is really the premier hazardous material supplier or mitigation equipment in the country. And this is a kit that is designed to take care of 55-gallon drums, small tanks, and so on and so forth. And what it uses as a mitigation component is neoprene rubber plugs of various sizes, as you can see. Some of them are square-ended, some of them are round balls on one end. The idea behind these devices, and we'll just use the example, here's another one that's a little bit different shape. You've got a release from somebody who's driven a nail through a 55-gallon drum, or a front-end loader through a 55-gallon drum, or what have you. A drum rolls over in the back of a truck, as we had down in the Rochester area some time ago. The bung was not in tight, and the product spilled, and so on. But anyway, what we're able to do with this is we're able to insert it in the hole, and we're able to tighten this down against the hole, and then stop the leak in manufacturing. This is kind of some of the plumbing hardware, if you will. This is very basic stuff. Like this in order to do the job. If you go out of my truck, you will find a big bag of various and odd and assorted shape sizes of wooden plugs, dowels ranging from about roughly 1/8 of an inch in diameter up to 4 inches in diameter. Well, yes, Bob.
I know for some of the compressed gases, they have caskets.
Yes.
Put over the top. Do you guys have that, or
Yes.
is that something, you got a list of who has those, or how does that?
Each of the emergency response teams, what Bob is referring to is what is called chlorine ABC kits. And they were originally designed by the Chlorine Institute to control releases from various size chlorine cylinders, ranging from 150 pound to railroad tank cars in size. And yes, the 4 emergency response teams, each of those has one set of each of the A, B, and C kits. In addition, what we've done with them is given them a separate set of specialized gaskets so that same kit can be used on sulfur dioxide containers as well. But they are scattered with the ERTs around the state. The reason they're with the ERTs and not with the chemical assessment teams is because that type of a release is a major, big, what we call level A, gas-tight, total encapsulating suit entry type of operation. And we didn't want to put that equipment out with chemical assessment teams and tempt them to go in and try to do something with 3 feet. Any questions or thoughts? Yes.
When you're going out with electric testing, monitoring and stuff,
Yes.
what protection do you use for yourself? I mean, if you know there's going to be gases or potential exposures, if you use blood gloves or...
Good question. Good question. I carry in my truck, and the teams have with them, different types of chemical suits. For those of you that might not be familiar, very quick lesson in protective clothing. There's level D, C, B, and A. Level D is protective clothing such as we're all wearing in a room tonight. Work clothes or that kind of thing. Or use case structural firefighting gear, like that. Not really a lot of chemical protection, and it steps up in level of protection to level A, where you're wearing a gas-type suit with self-contained breathing apparatus under it. I won't say it's impermeable, but the suit is designed to withstand the penetration of liquid and gas products. Different products have different effects on different suits and different materials. I carry in my truck level B protection, not gas type, so that what that says to me is now I can't go in an atmosphere that might have a level A requirement to it in terms of its toxicity. But the chemical assessment teams and emergency response teams could do that. Really the best defense you have is not necessarily the chemical protective clothing that you're wearing, but the instrumentation that you're carrying with you as you approach the incident. This thing gets very loving attention on my part. It is charged and calibrated religiously every 3 weeks. Because I just as soon not walk towards that spill of gasoline, if you will, and go boom, in a big, you know. My wife just has discovered a long time ago that I'm worth more dead than I am alive, but I'm real greedy. Okay? So this really is the best protection. Determine what the atmosphere is as you're going into it, and if you get into trouble, this is going to tell you. At the same time, wear appropriate level of protection. Protective clothing, whatever that might be for the particular product. And there are databases that we have that say if I have hydrofluoric acid is my substance that's spilled, I can look up in my database hydrofluoric acid and I can say, well, we have responder, capital responder plus level A gas tight suits. What is the holdout potential of that suit for hydrofluoric acid? And it will tell me that it either holds out for 120 minutes or, you know, whatever, 240 minutes or whatever before there's permeation. So that helps us select it. And we carry a variety of gloves, Viton, butyl, PVC, all different types of gloves and boots, and this type of thing. There's a new glove out now called the Silver Shield that just about holds out just about everything. And it's, in terms of protective clothing and gloves, it's about the best thing since sliced bread. And we carry a bunch of that stuff. It's a matter of looking at the chemical that you have, and if you don't know what it is, we always go the highest level of protection that is available to us. Does that deal with here? Anything else? We're good. Well, thank you. I won't take any more of your time this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you, and appreciate your attentiveness. And thank you for the good dinner. Yes. Edward.
Thanks again, Bob, for a great show, and let us play with your toys a little bit. Sure. Promise we'll put some of them back. That's all we have for today. So again, appreciate you everyone coming out this evening and joining us. And like I said, next month hopefully we'll see you on the 23rd, and bring a friend or two, and make sure you let us know that you're on your way. We'll have dinners for everyone. Thanks again.
You don't mind?
Sure. So where does the $175,000 per team come in? Is that the truck and all this stuff? Right, that's basically, you know, the equipment plus the vehicle and the trailer, each chemical assessment team. It's a Suburban, 3/4 ton Suburban, and a 16-foot trailer, all that stuff.
You need to bring the three guys together to go out at once?
Right. Yeah.
Because you're driving a truck.
Right.
So you got to go to a central location and get the wheel truck.
No, I would respond with my own vehicle, and they would go into their station and respond from their station. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.